So the Valorant Champions Tour is about to begin in 2024, and China is a whole new region that's being added. This means that there'll be 11 new teams to get to know, and I'm here to go over all of the teams that are going to be part of VCT China, put them in a tier list, because we're tier lists, and give you the download on everything you need to know. But real quick, why on earth should you listen to me? My name's RyanCentral, I'm an analyst and caster, done a lot of stuff in VCT, but I guess most importantly, I've watched partied pretty much all of the China tournaments last year, so I know the players, the new organizations, and most certainly what to keep an eye out for. So I've separated this tier list up into 5 main areas, and these are the general definitions of what each of the tiers mean. S tier is that these are contenders for the best team in China, and they really should be at international events. If they're not, there's going to be a problem, especially from the orgs POV. There's A tier as well, which are orgs that can most definitely make international events, shouldn't be too much of a surprise, but ultimately not in the same level as the S tier ones. B tier is a whole special tier, we'll get onto that in a second. And then there's the C tier, teams that could surprise, but ultimately we're not expecting them to be at Madrid, Shanghai, or Champions this year, but they might do better than expected. And then finally D tier, these aren't teams that are necessarily going to go 0-13 like DFM did in Pacific, but these are teams that are really not expected to surprise. It doesn't mean that they're going to be terrible, but they're just not really teams that you need to remember, I don't think. But without further ado, let's get started. Edward Gaming. Let's start with EDG. I wanted to do this tier list in alphabetical order, but I think personally it's better for me to start with EDG anyway. First of all, because most of you, if you follow VCT, should know this team. We've seen them internationally a couple of times at this point, so you should be familiar with Kung Kung and those kinds of players. But also what EDG has done in China refers and relates to the rest of the teams in this list. So contextually, it's easier to start with a popular team and then work our way through the other ones using EDG as an example. But they are owned by Edward Zoo. That's where the Edward in Edward Gaming comes from. They were founded in 2013, and over the past 10 years or so, they've been heavily involved in League of Legends, Riot's other game. There are different leagues all around the world in League of Legends, similar to Valorant, and the LPL is the one that's based in China. EDG have been in that pretty much, I think, the longest serving team, or one of the longest serving teams in that region. They also became world champions in League by winning Worlds in 2021, which wasn't that long ago. But they've been super successful within Valorant already, even on that international stage like I mentioned. Valorant came out in 2020, and Chinese teams weren't actually able to play the game for a few years because it still wasn't approved over there. So we have only been able to see Chinese teams play internationally at the likes of Masters events or Champions since last year, September 2022. I keep saying last year, thinking that we're in 2023, but not last year, the year before. Champions Istanbul, September 2022, was the first time that we saw a Chinese team play in the international scene, and it was Edward Gaming. And they have been at every single international event ever since, either by qualifying or being invited. Not only that, they've domestically dominated as well within China whilst that scene has been developing. At the end of 2023, there was this massive Chinese event called Evolution. It was happening. It was a 3-month tournament broken down into individual stages, and EDG came first in every single one of them. Some of those tournaments and series got a little bit close for EDG, but nevertheless, they got gold in all 3 stages. The Evolution series is also really important as a topic when it comes to this video, so don't forget about it. We'll be coming back to this tournament quite a bit. So it should come as no surprise that EDG are going to be at the top of this tier list in S. It's also why EDG have made 0 roster moves as well when they've done well internationally and also within China. They've kept all 5 of their players. I'd say the main players, if you know nothing about EDG, it's going to be the duelist Kung Kung. He is a flashy player, a great duelist, but he's an absolute theatrical performer as well when he needs to be, so it's great to watch him play and do his thing. The big caveat I have for EDG's success this year is twofold. One, how quickly is the rest of China going to catch up to EDG? Like I said, they started dropping maps and series, and they started to look really iffy in a lot of those games that EDG were comfortable with winning before. Now teams are catching up, can more catch up and maybe even surpass what EDG's been able to do. And the second reason is burnout. We've seen EDG play a lot of international events in the off-season and for Evolution. The players said that they were tired, so hopefully they got some good rest before they start in mid-February, which they definitely need. But EDG's the best, most known team. It's going to be the top of the list, but our team's going to be able to surpass them. Maybe. All gamers. AG's invitation to the China League might look surprising on the face of it. You might never have heard of this organization in your life, but it really isn't that much of a shock. They are actually a part of the LPL, the whole League of Legends region thing in China, but they're under a different name. They're actually anyone's legend over there. If you do follow League, you might not have known. I didn't know. I don't know why they're different names, but they've been in the league for the past 3 years in the LPL, so Riot wanted to extend their invitation over into VCT as well. The team, however, is a really tricky one to properly begin with, and preemptively I just want to put this team in the D tier, despite the fact that I really like this roster. It's kind of clever, but there's a couple of caveats. See, after a poor run of form in Evolution, AG just completely gutted their roster. And then they went on to pick up players from the following teams. EDG, that we just went over, best team in the region. Rare Atom, a name that will come up consistently in this video too, because they were the second best team in the region. And Attacking Soul Esports, which were all tier 1 organizations, so the players coming from those orgs should be good, right? So if that's the case, why am I still rating this team so low on the list? Well, the problem is that all of the players that they picked up were effectively substitutes. Spitfires, the player that was on Rare Atom, only played for this team when they were trying out the new map Sunset. He was playing Fade for them and swapping in every time Sunset came up in the tournament. But after a while, he was benched as the rest of the team got comfortable on this map, and the original core started playing, so Spitfires only really got to show up now and again. The two players from Attacking Soul Esports, Bunt and Monk, two names that you might actually have heard of if you were watching Masters Tokyo, because Attacking Soul attended that event, and so did these two players. So naturally, they have a bit more experience than Spitfires, but they were actually in a position where Bunt was totally benched from Attacking Soul in favor of YU, and then Monk was consistently in and out of this roster during Evolution in favor of Zero. So again, it was like both these players were underperforming and then being taken out of the roster, so their whole run of form wasn't great either. And then EDG's player, Sword9, he wasn't even a player for them. He was actually the assistant coach for EDG over the past 6 to 8 months. Granted, he has got some playing experience to Sword9, but not for a tier 1 team, not at this highest level of China, like Valorant, I suppose. And he's going to be IGLing, which kind of makes sense if he has like coaching experience, but still, it's odd to bring an assistant coach into a team like that. But filling up the roster is Del B. He's a duelist from 17 Gaming, who I really like. He's really good, but just inexperienced. We never saw 17 Gaming really get up into like the top 8, top 4 position, where they're playing up against EDG and BILIBILI and all those kind of squads. I will say though, they did grab the coach for Attacking Soul Esports, Ego, who might be able to make this roster sing a little bit more, but I think most of this team just doesn't have the reps or experience for playing in the top tier of China to really climb away from the bottom of the VCT league. I think there's worse teams, and I could definitely see AG maybe stealing a really good win here or there, but I just don't know if there's enough about this squad to really power rank them higher. It's pretty like low expectations, but I do like the idea of like picking up subs and underappreciated players from big rosters and seeing what they can do. A lot of people are going to be proving themselves on this roster, which I think is kind of exciting at least. Bilibili Gaming. BLG. It's literally a team that is so conflicting for me and other people I've spoken to. It's getting its own tier. The B tier is for Bilibili. That's where I'm putting them. BLG as an organization have been in the LPL again for quite some time, since 2018. They're owned by one of the biggest streaming platforms in the country. So again, no surprises that Riot wanted them here and invited them to be part of the partnership teams. But BLG is also a name that you might recognize if you were watching Champions last year in LA, because they attended that event, they qualified, and the main thing that they're known for nowadays is beating America's NRG twice. Whilst NRG were basically crap talking this team to the nth degree, BLG came in and made their status clear. And it's a great first impression for them to make on the international stage for everybody to see. But frankly, that form didn't continue into Evolution. In fact, BLG kind of went into freefall a little bit, especially in Stage 3. They came 5th in Stage 1, which was pretty good. They came 5th in Stage 2, again, pretty good. You expect them to be pushing top 4 at the very least. But they were one of the first teams to actually get knocked out and bottom out in Stage 3. They lost in a shock result to Tech, who is a team that we'll come on to, who were pretty much unknown at that point, who also picked ISO on Lotus against BLG and then still won. It was a routing. BLG just didn't know what the hell they were doing, and throughout the Evolution tournament, they were just looking worse and worse and trying to change up a lot of different stuff. They swapped who was IGL, and it used to be Bianc. Bianc didn't want to do it anymore because I think it was affecting his personal performance. And I think they even swapped out coaches. I don't know who's coaching this team now because like there was so much going on and there was nobody to translate it all into English for me. It was just weird. But overall, BLG just couldn't really find that magic that they had in LA. So they made a roster move. They dropped Rin, who, yeah, absolutely should have been dropped. He was really underperforming. I didn't like watching him. But they brought in Bear from Enter, who is taking over that controller role despite being more of a flex initiator. And he's also going to be IGLing for the team, so everybody's going to be happy. Maybe they've sorted out their coaches. I think they have at this point. But now there is a solid chance that BLG can fix the previous issues and bounce back to where they used to be, right? Well, I still worry about this team. For one, Wisey's performance on Duelist has been really spotty from Evolution, and personally for my eye test, I haven't enjoyed watching him as much as other Duelists, especially in the S tier. He caught everybody's eye in Champions with his raised judge play, but I think outside of that, we never really saw him hit that level over the past 3 or 4 months. And so I really need to see more out of him individually. So BLG is sitting in that B tier for me. Expectations are high. They could go to Madrid, they could go to Shanghai, these big international events that are happening this year. There's definitely a world where BLG could make it, but they have to reach not only the same level that they had in LA, but a whole nother level as everybody else is getting better. If not, there's a lot of pressure on the team's shoulders, and I think the whole team could get gutted if they just don't perform well. Dragon Ranger Gaming. Now we come onto our Ascension team, DRG. Ascension's a bit of a complicated thing to explain quickly if you don't know, but effectively, the China League has 11 teams. 10 of those Riot hand selected and said, hey, we want you to be a part of our league. We want you to play in the Valorant tournaments, create content, increase your brand, and we'll actually pay you stipends to be a part of our league, and you'll get cuts of gun bundle money, like for champions, and even some other stuff that they're adding later in the year. So a lot of orgs are trying to get into bed with Riot to be a part of this league, but what about everybody else that Riot doesn't invite? Big orgs like TSM, FaZe, they weren't invited in Americas. You got Weibo, Royal Never Give Up in China that weren't invited either. So what the hell are these orgs meant to do otherwise? Well, they have to play domestically in tier 2 tournaments within their region. They then go to this tournament called Ascension, and whoever wins Ascension would qualify for the VCT international leagues. Kind of like the playoff promotions from the championships to the Premier League. That's Ascension. But China also had its own Ascension tournament. Teams earned points throughout each of the stages in Evolution, and then would have a chance to play and qualify for the main league that was in late December. And it was DRG that actually won the whole event in pretty surprising fashion. They weren't favourites for the tournament. In fact, Rare Atom, a team again that we keep talking about, who was considered the second best team behind Edward Gaming at the time, were heavy favourites. So the fact that DRG went on a run and even beat Rare Atom in the grand finals wasn't really what people were expecting. But that means that DRG is going to be playing alongside these partner teams for the next couple of years. But they had to make a roster change. See, for the Evolution tournament and Ascension for China in 2023, the league allowed these teams to have 2 imports within their roster. Imports effectively being people from other regions, Europe, Americas, Korea, that weren't from China. However, in 2024, and much like the other VCT partnership leagues around the world, you're only allowed 1 import now. So if you had 2 Koreans on your roster beforehand, you have to choose one of them and drop the other. DRG were in this position as well. They had a Russian player, Vukashu, who they opted to keep because he is insane. And by the way, Vukashu, you're doing EMEA proud, son. Keep it up. So they kept him, and they ended up dropping their control player, Zeno, who was Singaporean. Had to choose one or the other. And they went for the Russian god tier Sentinel, who doesn't speak a lick of Chinese. So he just has to deal with it. Like, they come in Chinese, he was telling me, and he just has to, like, basically play on his own and work around there. But I think they're getting better at that, clearly, because they want Ascension, right? So they drop Zeno, and they also bring in TZH over from FPX, who was a Viper main, and all things considered, I think is a pretty good pickup for them. But also as a note, going into Ascension, they made a roster move. They brought in a player called Dingwei, who I never heard of at that point. He was a very recent addition. He played really good during Ascension, but we haven't really seen that much of him outside of that. So he just came in from nowhere, won one of the hardest tournaments, I think, to win in Valorant full stop, and yeah, didn't say anything else. With all of this said, however, I just don't have the highest expectations for our Ascension winners. Whilst DRG consistently has been getting better through the Evolution Series tournaments, and they beat a really good Rare Atom in Ascension, they were a team that typically lost to those above them in this tier list. and got upset a couple of times by worse teams like TYLOO during the league. So DRG weren't ever really competing with EDG or the likes of FPX or Rare Atom outside of Ascension. So I think that DRG is just going to be like the bar of VCT China, in the sense of the teams that they lose to are higher. They could consider teams that you might see in like Masters Madrid or Masters Shanghai, but the teams that DRG do win against are the bottom of the pile. You don't expect to see much. Like DRG is literally like the mean point of how good these squads are, which is good for an Ascension team, I think, but I don't think the DRG is going to be going to Madrid or anything like that. Fun plus Phoenix. This is a team that, again, I don't really think needs that much introduction, because this org has been in the LPL for a long time. They've literally won Worlds 2, but in Valorant specifically, they've been involved since the very beginning. Granted, they used to have an EMEA team for the first couple of years, but they are the only organization within this list that has actually won an international event, as FPX came home with gold at the Masters Copenhagen in 2022. Again, completely different roster. At the start of 2023, FPX moved over to being just a Chinese-focused team, as the rest of FPX went over to Na'Vi for the most part. But this is also a team that, within that time, has attended international events with a Chinese roster. They played at Lock-In, and they, of course, qualified for Champions in LA as well. However, at the international events, they didn't really do that well. I think they lost to KC at Lock-In and then just really didn't get that much done over in Champions either. So the roster has changed quite a bit since those events. For example, Autumn came in as an incredible duelist throughout Evolution, but his role is actually going to change up again as FPX brought in Life, who was previously on EDG, but most recently attacking Seoul Esports, who again was a really good jet, really good duelist, so it does force Autumn away from that role. Autumn is now expected to fill that flex position after TCH went to DRG, like we just mentioned, but outside of that, FPX are remaining committed to the rest of this roster, and they absolutely should. It's S tier. During the Evolution series, they came 3rd in Stage 1, 5th and 6th in Stage 2 due to running into Rare Atom fairly early on in that tournament, but then came 3rd again in Stage 3, having some really good series against EDG and Rare Atom too. So they're most definitely in that upper S tier, and also with the Sky meta changes coming in, this is going to 100% suit this team. Yang, who was mostly playing Gecko throughout the Evolution series before he was even buffed, is going to be in a great position to get the most out of this meta. I think it is literally the Yang meta going forward, because Gecko's going to get more play. It seemed that he was kind of allergic to playing Sky as much as he possibly could, so now he has a bit more creativity to work with, now that Sky isn't as strong as she used to be, which is going to suit this team great. But overall, though, I don't think that there's really a weak link in this roster now. FPX has and will demand greatness from their teams, so if we do see FPX missing out on Madrid, or even worse, missing out on the Masters Shanghai event that is happening within their own home country, I think heads are about to roll. There's a lot of pressure on this roster, but I think that these players in particular are going to be capable of it. JDG. JDD's addition to the Valorant League was going to be a likely one, I think. They've been a part of the LPL since 2017. They're owned by Jingdong, which I've heard is basically the Chinese equivalent of Amazon. And they apparently spent $16 million on their League of Legends team last year alone, and yet they still came 4th at Worlds. So JDG have a lot of money, they're willing to spend it, and they've already started by apparently spending $1 million to buy out the main core of Rare Atom, that team that we keep coming back to. They have now mostly gone to JDG. So let's go over that Rare Atom team a little bit more. They were the 2nd best team in China at the end of the year. They came 2nd in Stage 1, 3rd in Stage 2, and 2nd in Stage 3. So they've been going neck and neck versus EDG in multiple finals, even beating EDG in some of these series too. But Rare Atom as an organization, who also are part of the LPL, they weren't asked to be a part of the VCT League, so they had to play Ascension, which we spoke about. Rare Atom were heavy favorites for that, but unfortunately lost in the grand finals to DRG. So JDG, who didn't have a good roster at the time, caught everybody, and it was an easy decision for them to spend that money to pick up that Rare Atom core. But you might have noticed that they only picked up 4 players from Rare Atom, and not Yeoman, who was Rare Atom's IGL. This is because, much like DRG, Rare Atom had 2 import Koreans, and they had to basically choose between Stu, their duelist, or Yeoman, the IGL. Because both were Korean, they could play together in last year, but going into this one, you can only have one Korean on your roster, so they chose Stu. I've seen people like Sideshow talk about this in particular and say that it must be a really tough decision for JDG to make, whether you keep your star duelist or your star IGL, but honestly for me, Stu clears easily. Youngman was a good IGL. I think he played well and he had some good ideas, but I don't think he was like phenomenal. And I also think that within China, this is a thing that not many people know about, there are a lot of in-game leaders. There's a lot of people that can do that mid-round calling like Youngman does that can fit onto this team nicely. In like EMEA, it's very hard to find an IGL. In China, there's a lot of them. A lot of players willing to go into that role, which is what JDG managed to get with J-Kuro, who was on top esports. I actually don't think J-Kuro IGL'd for top, which is kind of weird. I think that was Sylvan. However, I do think that J-Kuro can don the IGL role really nicely, and I just think overall he could definitely have a higher ceiling as an IGL than Youngman. So to nobody's surprise, I don't think, the team that was second best within the region consistently at the end of last year, that I think made an upgrade in the right place, it's going in the S tier, I think. If we don't see JDG at an international event, something has gone incredibly wrong. I think my only concern about this roster are the support players, Yihao and Martin, the controller, and Martin being the sentinel. And especially Martin, he had really weak performances on a few occasions, which I think cost Rare Atom a lot of impactful rounds. Every player has that, but Martin, I just don't think was keeping up in the same way. But honestly, Stu and Viva, those players can absolutely carry any game that they're in, and they can carry this team to the top level. I genuinely think that the sky's the limit, and this is likely to be the main competitor behind Edward Gaming. They have the resources, they have the team now. Do they have that capability of making Madrid? Because if they don't, things are going to look a bit iffy, I think. Nova Esports. Let's talk about Nova then, who are going to be the Omega LOL, I think, of this selection. I don't think many people are going to know who they are, but they were founded in 2020, and they're owned by the Imperium Group Global Holdings Limited, which I couldn't tell you what they do. It just sounds very corporate. But this is actually an org that has not really been involved in League of Legends at all, but they have been involved notably in PUBG Mobile, as well as Wild Rift, which is the League of Legends mobile equivalent. And they also have like 2 million followers on Weibo, which is probably like the average, I think, for a lot of the orgs on this list. EDG and teams like that might have 7 or 8 million, which is a lot of people. But 2 million followers on an org that I'd never heard of before this, it somewhat shows that they're quite popular in China as a whole. But I think there's a key thing to note here too. There are a lot of organizations on this list that are big in mobile gaming. Nova Esports is one of them, and Valorant Mobile is a thing, and it might even come out like this year or next. I don't know when, but some point soon. It's murmuring for sure. So I guess this was right, maybe wanting to include some of those big mobile organizations that aren't really that involved in like League of Legends outside of Wild Rift, involve them into the Valorant scene before Valorant Mobile becomes a thing, and these orgs naturally want to invest into that side of the esport too. It's similar, I think, to RRQ, which is in Pacific. It was an org that I never really heard of, but they were like pretty involved in like PUBG Mobile. So Riot wants to get those big orgs in that have a big audience in the mobile gaming market that they can maybe show Valorant Mobile in the future. I think it makes a lot of sense. What doesn't make sense is this whole roster. Now, most teams underperformed during the Evolution tournament last year that made partnerships such as AG, JDG, as we discussed, Wolves later on. They all dropped their rosters because they were underperforming. Nova, whose best performance was making play-ins during stage 1 and then bombing out of every single open qualifier afterwards for the rest of the year, decided to keep everybody. They did bring in a couple of players. They brought in Guanji from RNG, who was like decent but not great. And they also brought in Never, who is a Russian player that played for Rad last in March of last year, I think. But he's not even on the team lineup graphic for the website either. So he doesn't even look like he's playing despite being brought in for this team. So where am I putting them on the tier list? At the bottom. My expectations are at the floor for these guys. Every other team has upgraded to an extent and in an important area too, but this team has stayed the same. The only positive I can think of is just getting to see their IGL play. Trace Esports. This is honestly an org I never expected to see in this league and on this list. Whilst organizations like EDG and FPX have over 6 million followers on Weibo, for example, Trace have less. A lot less, in fact. But Trace, previously known as Totoro Gaming, were founded in 2020. They're owned by Trace Media, and they've been involved in the likes of Crossfire for one. Maybe Trace caught the attention of Riot via Wild Rift. They were playing a lot in those kind of tournaments, and like I said before, bringing over these organizations with a big focus on mobile games isn't a bad shout, when we also have a mobile game on the way sometime in the future generally. But they might also have caught Riot's attention from how they played in Valorant, especially in the Evolution series. Trace came 4th, 2nd and 4th again across the 3 stages, and built themselves as frankly one of the best teams in the region, alongside Rare Atom and EDG and FPX. Heibi might be one of the best IGLs in China. Feng Feng, which I know sounds like a doppelganger of Kung Kung, but here we are, is a brilliant flex duelist player when it needs to be. YOU, yes, his name isn't just you, it's spelled out YOU because Chinese players are just trolls with their usernames, is a brilliant sentinel. And Destroyer, the coach, has had some of the best impacts from coach timeouts that I've seen in games pretty much anywhere. The guy is a genius, and it's some of the best stuff that you'll see out there. For the rest of the roster, Kai has moments where he competes with the other top duelists in the region. He can flex to other roles too, similar to Viva, but I do want to see more out of him, and most certainly more out of Flexin, who is the only player that I'm not convinced on that can really go to the top level. They did bring in a substitute player of CXY that maybe could be a bit of a push for Flexin in that competitive role, but this team is the only team that's going into the A tier. I don't think it belongs at the same level of JDG, FPX and stuff, but if there's a dark horse team that you want to cheer on, that not many other people are really going to be looking at that much, in my eyes, it's still Trace. Definitely keep an eye on them. They could most certainly go to Madrid. Titan Esports Club. I don't think anybody calls them Titans Esports Club. They're just tech, but it's a very interesting choice again for Riot's partnership league. Riot wanted them involved. They were founded in 2021 by Titan Sports Media, and are mostly again known for PUBG Mobile. So again, you can sort of see the connection happening. But Tech were also a nice surprise in Valorant 2. Out of the 3 stages in Evolution, Tech only existed playing in Valorant for the 3rd one, and they actually finished top 6. Like, they just came in from nowhere and beat a lot of big teams, the likes of Top Esports, who were consistently climbing the ranks too, and they even knocked out Bilibili, like I mentioned earlier. But if that wasn't mad enough for you to really learn this name, they were the team that signed RB from DRX, one of the best Korean players that we've had in Valorant. Tech were like, yep, we're grabbing him, we're putting him in this roster, and it's such a big move for the early lifespan of this org. Like, it's a great statement to make. However, I think it's very easy, naturally, to run away with this roster with how exciting it's looking. It's exciting that they signed RB, who's a great player. They also had some really nice ideas. They were playing stuff like ISO, QA looks great. Abo's got some really good experience from playing with EDG way back when, and he's also IGLing as the duelist. It's easy to sort of go, yeah, this team is onto a winner. But I just need to see more of this team. I need to see more of everybody to really see if they're onto something. We only saw 1 stage of them. I'm thinking, like, if we had a stage 4 of Evolution, would Tech have finished top 6 again? Could they even surpass that and do a little bit better? Start climbing bit by bit? Or would it just be a flash in the pan? Would that kind of thing ever happen again? I just really have no idea how to rate this team because we just haven't seen that much sample size from them. Naturally as well, I think it's kind of easy to assume that RB's like addition to this team is just a net buff because the China region is still growing, that this guy can just come in and start smurfing on people. I really don't think so. I think China's caught up very quickly. Is it behind the rest of the regions around the world on average? Yeah, I think so. Is it going to take long for China to catch up or surpass? Absolutely not. And I don't think that RB just coming in here means that this team now could compete with EDG because they have RB. I don't think it works like that. So I'm putting them in the C tier. They most certainly could surprise me. I could eat my words if there's a team that could just explode out of nothing and do work. I think it is this one. But I can't sit here in good faith and say that this team is 100% going places, going to do this kind of stuff, without seeing them a little bit more. Maybe for the kickoff tournament, we really get to see what Tech can do. It's exciting, but I'm not going to get carried away with this one. I have another team that I'm getting carried away with. TYLOO. Whilst TYLOO have never been involved in any of Riot's games like League of Legends before, they are a pretty well-known organization around the world from the likes of CSGO and PUBG. Their addition seems like a fitting one, just a different sort of org than you usually get. And honestly, their time in Valorant hasn't been that shabby either. They came top 8 in the first stage of the Evolution, top 8 in stage 2 again, but they didn't make it out the open qualifiers in stage 3. They lost to LGD, another big org that didn't make any of this. which did dampen TYLOO's reputation and the consistent run that they were on. They also made a great roster move by signing HFMI 0DZJC9Z7, or just HFMI as everybody's going to call him. He was on Attacking Seoul, a really good player. We saw him play at Masters Tokyo as well. And whilst I think HFMI is an absurdly good pickup for this team and should have gone to any of the other franchise teams too, players like Ninebody and Ice King that were originally on this roster were great to watch. I'm still putting TYLOO in D tier. Top 8 is a really nice, consistent place to put this squad. Top 8 team in the region as a whole. But for the VCT leagues, there's only 11 teams in them, right? So I do have them beating the likes of All Gamers, Nova. They could even go 50-50 against DRG or other teams in the C tier. But I just don't think nor know that this team will really build up to what they showed in Evolution and go beyond that. Because whilst I like them in an open system, when you're playing up against the big dogs consistently, and it's all or nothing on one best of 3 per week-ish, I don't think that system's going to really bode well for this squad, and it hasn't really worked for them all that much in Evolution either. So it's like an alright team, but D tier, I guess watch out for HFMI, but I don't know what this team is really going to do, if anything at all. Wolves Esports. Finally, we have Wolverhampton Wanderers. Oh, kinda. This is Wolves Esports. They're owned by Fosun, who also own the English Premier League football team Wolverhampton Wanderers, which is the logo. Wolves were founded in 1877. The football team, not the esports team. The esports team was founded in 2018 and has actually had some pretty good success within esports outside of the Riot world. They weren't involved in the LPL or anything like that, but they had great traction in Arena of Valor, big game over in China, and they recently won the Call of Duty mobile major that happened late last year. So they're really going places. They have a French Rainbow Six Siege team too. Now they're involved in Valorant. And the Valorant roster is actually sick. I love this team. They dropped their previous roster because they underperformed, and they actually picked up 8 players, the majority from a team called Monarch. Now, this is where a couple of people like Thinkerman's Valorant and Elevated went wrong with this with their tier list. They made the assumption that the core team of Monarch that was picked up, because it was 4 players there, that would be the team that Wolves would run with and build around. But that's not true. In fact, the other pickups that were picked up outside of these 4 is the potential super team in the making. They picked up Spring, who is a duelist from NIP, who had a really good showing during Ascension in December. They picked up the Australian IGL Plix, who you might remember in the early days of NA's Valorant because he played on Sonics, but he also played quite a lot in China last year, notably for Weibo Gaming. So he has a good amount of experience IGLing within China and within the region as a whole. They grabbed Coldfish from Top and YU from Attacking Seoul Esports, who are great selections, especially YU. I think he's a fantastic Sentinel. Used to be a duelist for FPX, moved to a Sentinel for Attacking Seoul, looked great doing so. The only question mark is Alolba, who came from Monarch and is the only player from that squad that's expected to be on the starting lineup. The rest of Monarch that was picked up are likely, I think, to be offered up to China VCL teams to play under a 2-way contract style. Basically, they would become Wolves' academy team. That's the general sense of what's going on there. But remember at the start of the video when I was saying that like AG's pickups individually were good, but lacked some reps at tier 1? This is the team in the same position that does have the reps and the experience and could go on and do some really good things. I wouldn't say it's necessarily surefire. Again, I'm trying to pull myself back, but I think that this is a team that sort of belongs around the C tier. I think that's fair. Like Tech, they can go on a run. They could do some really good stuff, but it's whether it all comes together in the right way. Picking up 5 individually great players is one thing. Having them play like a team in such a short amount of time, that's another. But I hope that Wolverhampton Wanderers could do some damage in Valorant. I never thought I would say this. But this is the full tier list. Screenshot this. I'll even do... There you go. Post it on Reddit. Do whatever the hell that you want with it. But remember that tier lists like this are going to be wrong. Such is the nature of a power ranking. Like, it's the whole idea of... I want to set up the expectations of what teams we want to see at Madrid or expect to see at Madrid. What teams aren't going to do much. But that is going to be blown out the water. That's why stuff like EG last year was such a good example for NA, because everybody thought that they were the worst team in the world, pretty much, and they ended up winning champions. So I want this tier list to be wrong, but this should be a general understanding of where the teams are, what to expect, and when we do have that kickoff tournament starting on February the 22nd, we get to see whether it all comes to fruition or what places are going to maybe surprise a few people. I'd also say it's 99% likely that there won't be an English broadcast for China this year at this point. So I'm going to be watch partying all of the China games on my Twitch, which is in the description. Just Twitch TV, RyanCentral. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. See you on the 22nd for China's kickoff tournament. See you then.